Time to talk about some numbers for Rise of Skywalker and Star Wars. So, like many people, I've seen the Rise of Skywalker. I've been there. I'm depressed. I don't think it didn't answer any questions. It didn't do anything to really entertain me. Some of the blind, blatant, pointless nostalgia, I think, infuriated me more than anything else. Like most people, we can all skip the Last Jedi as a cinematic dumpster fire. And The Force Awakens. I mean, even though on our way back from the theater, um, my son and I we chewed the whole thing apart. Right? We went scene for scene and you know everything. There's a Millennium Falcon. There's a desert planet. There's a cantina. There's a planet killing weapon, all this stuff. It's like, oh, they remade A New Hope, the original Star Wars movie. Okay. I can give you that to have a softball opening to a trilogy. I can give you that. Right? But then dumpster fire happens and now pointless nostalgia has happened. So I I just wonder kind of what would happen if this has been done differently, right? So I went back and I did some numbers, right? I pulled up a spreadsheet. I'm like, okay, so the original trilogy, I mean, A New Hope has been, the original Star Wars movie has been re-released, and I think some of that money is in this $775 million. But so what I did was I took the first movie in each trilogy, and I put up what it lost over the original movie in the trilogy. So here we're losing. The Empire was 227 million less, and Jedi was 300 million, with a total of 527 $1 million. So I'm talking about potential. If Empire would have made the same potential as A New Hope and made at least 775, then that would have been zeros, and then you would have had stayed that the same. So it's a kind of a graph, right, that I'm looking at. So I went back to the prequels and did kind of the same thing. So Phantom Menace gets just over $1 billion, and then Clone Wars really down. Revenge of the Sith comes back up. So does about the same drop over everything else. And to be fair about all this, I went and I pulled up Avengers. So we had Avengers, Age of Ultron, Infinity War, and Endgame. So these movies had a plan. They had a formula that moved them forward, that brought, story elements and things like that forward continually. So if we start with Avengers as the bar to set for all the other movies, then Ultron does a little bit less, only 116 million less. Then Infinity War does $500 million more, and then Endgame does $1.2 billion for an increase over the whole thing of $1.6 billion. So if all of the movies had done 1.5, that would get me zeros, right? Then the gain loss over these films would have been zero. That means each of them would have been equally produced the same, effects the same, story the same, intrigue and draw for each audience. But these didn't. These movies actually increased, granted with the other movies that were around it, but it still increased people wanting to go see them and see them over and over again repeatedly, because you don't get these numbers without repeat viewings. So after I did that, I said, okay, let's look at Disney Star Wars. Okay. So The Force Awakens does $2 billion. And here I'm breaking these out a little bit. So we have The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker. And in between here, we have Rogue One and Solo. So we're taking these as separate even though they're all on the same chart. So if The Force Awakens is going to be the bar that we're going to set at $2 billion, which for a Star Wars film, right, that should be easy, right? The next Star Wars trilogy film will probably do a little bit less, but not a lot. I mean, if we look over here, we can see a small percentage drop, a percentage drop. That's like 30% drop, and that's probably another 30-40% drop. Okay, so here we have the $2 billion from The Force Awakens. Then The Last Jedi drops about probably 40-45% box office. And now we have The Rise of Skywalker dropping 50% off of that box office. Where, if you compare that to something like Marvel, we have just a small dip for Age of Ultron, still pulling in $1.4 billion here. But then we're right back to it. Infinity War kicking it up, Endgame kicking it up. They're drawing people in. They're giving reasons for people to go. They're increasing the fan base. They're getting word of mouth. They're doing all those things right. So now if we look at Rogue One as the baseline for the non-trilogy movies, and then we look at Solo, which dumps your fire at the box office. We add all of these things up. So this is potential. If we could have kept every film in the trilogy at $2 billion, and we could have kept every individual non-trilogy film at $1 billion, then we're actually leaving $2.4 billion on the table. So if you look at this graph down here, so this first column is The Force Awakens, and then we see The Last Jedi has this big red here, because that's potential earnings that we didn't get because the film was bad. And now we have The Rise of Skywalker, also huge potential earnings that were left on the table. From Rogue One to Solo, we have the same thing. Gigantic earnings left on the table that if you would have kept your identity politics and virtue signaling out of the film, these would have all been straight across, and you would have $2.4 billion more in your pocket, Disney. But instead, I mean, if we take the budget for all of these films and add it to this $2.4 billion, that's $3.7 billion that basically Disney is in the negative column for these films. So if, say, we were able to get a good trilogy with a good story, which was continually drawing people in and moving people into the movie, The Rise of Skywalker could have potentially have been the Endgame breaker, could have dethroned Endgame. That was always a possibility with Star Wars. It was like nothing. For years, Star Wars was like the unbreakable property. So if this would have been potentially a $3 billion, if we could have had The Rise of Skywalker, or whatever the better name would have been in an alternate Disney trilogy that actually made sense, that could have ended up being a $3 billion film, which means that this number is actually more like $4.7 billion that Disney has left on the table. Looking at it this way, really, I mean, you can say, oh, well, this movie did $2 billion, this one did $1 billion. If we skip Solo, I mean, still Rise of Skywalker is going to do $1 billion. I mean, that's fine. But if you look at it this way, as potential earnings that they didn't make because they went with virtual signaling and identity politics and having their agenda, this is what agenda gets you. It gets you all this red, all this money that's left in people's pockets and not in Disney's pocket. So this is where you can really see the failings of, Kathleen Kennedy. That's her legacy right there. I think that's her legacy right there. This is what happens when you put the secretary in charge of the office. Things don't go well. There's definitely a downward, box office spiral there. All right, well, I just wanted to go over those numbers really quick. I threw them together and I'm like, wow, this. I didn't know how much it was going to end up being, but I mean, $2.4 billion that they left on the table. Just not. How do you do that? I mean, in any deal, if you take into account that if done correctly, the third movie in the trilogy could have potentially made $3 billion. They have actually left on the table the $4 billion, more than the $4 billion that they paid for Star Wars. It's amazing. I don't know how. I mean, me, just a simple guy. I mean, yeah, I know how to work a spreadsheet, but why isn't someone at Disney going, hello, Iger, I think there's a problem. Hello, I think there's a problem here. We need to do something. But no, they keep on creating these films that are just, oh my gosh, just horrible. I was talking with my son about them today, and I get all worked up about what could have been and what we could have had. Just amazing. All right, well, thanks for watching this. If you have any comments, you think I've did all my numbers wrong, you think I'm completely out of the park, let me know. Dislike the video because you think I've screwed everything up, or like the video and say, yeah, you're right. And comment and tell me what you think. You think that Disney has left this $4 billion on the table? You think they've completely screwed up, or do you think they're doing okay? That we're going to make it. The Mandalorian's going to save it all. Although the last I watched, Lost in Space, and the storylines are so much more complicated and better in Lost in Space for what it is. There seemed to be so much better than The Mandalorian that I'm like, wow, I need to either stop watching The Mandalorian or I need to stop watching Lost in Space so that I'm not depressed about them one being so much better than the other. Anyway. All right. Well, thanks for watching this one. Take care.